Now we are soon ending the seminar, and you have been so fortunate to have this something really beautiful butterfly flying in and out of your working groups. And her name is Pauline. She is a senior lecturer in youth and community studies at Newman University. She's a director of international partnerships with Youth Work Europe, National Steering Group of In Defense of Youth Work, founding member and vice president of Professional Open Youth Work in Europe, POIVI, and also the most amazing glassblower. Pauline Grace, you have now the easy work to sum up the whole seminar.
Thanks, Tuna. Wow. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. So you will have noticed that I've been buzzing around and popping in and out of your group work tasks, and in my title it says summing up. And I have to tell you that before this conference took off, I was like, really? We're going to do a seminar over 3 days digitally, and we're going to talk about such a important topic like mental health and youth work? It's impossible. But look what we've done. It's amazing, isn't it? It's just like 3 days, 100 people, a group of facilitators, and I myself have made pages of notes. I'm not sure about you. Every facilitator that you've worked with has made pages of notes. And so please forgive me if in my summing up I don't manage to capture your experience, because I've got 20 minutes to kind of try and squish all of that in. Is that okay? Fantastic. I guess the first thing I should do is introduce myself, and Tuna's done a great job, huh? But just for a bit more context, I am a product of youth work in England. I was what you would call a chronic school non-attender. So I didn't go to school, hated school. Forgive me, teachers in the room, but I couldn't stand being taught by teachers who thought I was a child. Because actually I grew up really quickly and I was quite responsible, and but I found my local youth club and my local youth worker, and they called me by my first name, and they didn't worry about my hairstyle or the fact that I swore a lot, and it felt like I came home a little bit. So in some senses, youth work and being involved with youth workers shaped the rest of my life. And here I am now working in a university, training people to be youth workers, and it's a really lovely turnaround, and it's kind of a transformation. So I spent lots of time. I've been a youth worker since 1989. I know I don't look that old, but I think it's something that's in you. It's like a vocation, and you either are really interested in people or you're really not. And it doesn't matter how many degrees and education or training, you can't fake that. Do you agree? I can see all your faces, so that's great. The other thing I'd like to just point out is I'm just going to turn my video off. Do you see this photo of me? It's a very poignant photo for me. This photo was taken in Estonia last year, after I returned from work after 6 months from being ill. And I was off work for 6 months for being ill from burnout. I just didn't look after myself. I looked after everybody else. I made sure everybody else around me was good. My family, my students, the youth workers, the young people, my colleagues, my manager. And then eventually I couldn't get out of bed one day. So I talk about mental health and this summing up from a very personal perspective as well as a professional perspective. Okay. Before we carry on, and before I get into 3 days of summing up, can you all do a breathing exercise with me? because I don't know about you, but I've had a spot of lunch. I've just sat back down. My energy is probably in my arse rather than in my head. And I'd really like to rejuvenate myself. So, with me, could you take a risk and close your eyes? Close your eyes and relax your shoulders. Close your eyes and breathe in to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, blowing out. Every time you breathe in, imagine that you're breathing a white, bright light that's filling you with energy and positivity and an aspect of life that you really cherish. And every time you blow out, you're blowing out negativity, you're blowing out anything that brings you down, which means every breath you take is rejuvenating you. Breathing into 4, and 1 final blowout. And when you blow out, open your eyes and have a nice stretch. Yay! People feeling a bit more alive. Okay, so for those of you that were with us right from the very beginning, let's think. We started off with Professor Stephen Minton, and it was an amazing presentation, and it was full of lots of things for us to think about from our perspective. And I know that not all of us here are youth workers. We come from a variety of different fields and backgrounds.
Pauline, you be careful with your microphone, please. You are putting.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Did you hear my bit about Stephen Minton?
Yeah.
Did you hear my bit about we're not all youth workers here, but we're interested in working with young people?
Yeah. Just a short second in the end.
Okay. So Stephen introduced us some ideas around maybe needing to have a paradigm shift. So rather than thinking about mental health in the negative, we also need to have a balance there about thinking about mental health in the positive. And he made some really interesting comments about, maybe our mental health is affected by the fact that we're living in increasingly complex times. Increasingly complex times. Because life's really simple for all of us at the moment, isn't it? COVID's not had an impact on us. The world going a million miles an hour hasn't had an impact on us. Us being able to have to, reflect on the moment all the time. So he made an important point about let's just understand we are living in complex times, but also, unfortunately, we all don't live in Norway. So we live in unequal societies too. My reality is different to your reality. It's different to everybody else's reality. He also talked about when we talk about mental health and mental illness, we can't ignore the socio-economic factors involved in that. Which means we can't just blame the individual. We can't say, oh, pull yourself together. What's wrong with you? Just pretend that you feel okay and get on with the rest of your life. Some of you may have heard of Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, Maslow says we have to have some really base things going on in our life to make sure that we thrive. We have to have a house. We have to have food. We have to have water. We have to have people who love us. We have to feel connected. And so let's not forget that people's mental health is impacted by those social economical factors. He also introduced this idea of something called the positivist view of well-being. Now, some of you might be thinking positivist is positive. And I don't think in this case Stephen was referring to it in that way. I think he was really looking at saying that most public health sectors seek to heal people from their problems rather than looking to see what caused their problems in the first place. Another thing that was very resonant about Stephen's pitch was he wanted us to look at things from a humanistic point of view. And, you know, if youth workers are nothing more than being human, right, we've done a good job. So Carl Rogers talks about person-centred, human-centred approaches. And if we're operating from a space where we are meeting as human beings, I guess what Stephen is suggesting, that's not a bad place to start. I think I rephrased that, I'm really sorry to swear again, in that young people have an inbuilt bullshit detector. They just know whether or not you care or not. Although the professor put it in a much better way than that. He also introduced us, didn't he, into this power wheel, originally from David Schmale, which meant that we had to look at the holistic. We've been using things like
Your mic is again blocked. Be careful, Pauline, please.
I don't know what I'm doing to block my microphone.
Don't move much. Thank you.
I can't move. Oh my God. Okay. The power wheel. We've been using that quite a lot in the UK in the last decade. And unfortunately, it's become quite reductive. It's used to interview young people, to get them to stipulate where they think their problems are and what they can do to resolve their own problems in 6 weeks. So the power wheel has lots and lots of positives, but it needs to be used carefully. It needs to be used with full training, and it doesn't need to be used as a blunt instrument to hit young people over the heads with. Okay, some of the group work from Stephen's session, some of your breakouts, what was mentioned was that youth workers can be mental health first aiders. Wow. And that's a theme that went on throughout the 3 days. Mental health first aiders. So the notion that we use ourselves in that everyday situation to help with the crisis. And as Paul said earlier on this morning, maybe we do that for the first half an hour and the young person calms down. And then we say, there are some professionals that we can refer you to here. And so interagency work was a really major point coming through the 3 days too. I'd like to quickly move on to Vili and Camilla's presentation, where they talked about resonance and alienation according to Russell. And I think maybe for some people this was a tough presentation to go through, because if you don't already know the work of Russell, it's quite complex to get your head around. But what we did find out from our group work tasks, we know how young people resonate with us and how we resonate with them. And we also understand that young people are alienated, don't we? Some of the questions from the group work task from that presentation says we have to be really mindful about the partnership between schools and youth work. Young people spend a lot of time at school, and maybe youth work can be a complementary service to the experience that young people have at school. And hey, look, I didn't go to school. Look at me. Some of the things that came out of the presentation about Vili around Rosso was this aspect that you needed to really understand who you're referring to, where the young people are going to, and your passion will shine out. If you're passionate about your subject, the people that you work with will know that you're passionate about that too. And you can't stop it, it just flows. I've got a question for you though about alienation. My question is it wrong that young people feel alienated? Or if you're living in an unjust, unequal society, shouldn't we feel alienated? And isn't that space of feeling alienated a position to move on from? Answers on a postcard, please. Okay. Let's move on now. We're racing through this. And I'm looking now at the work that was going on in parallel session with Magnus around social media and young people. And the thing that we learned about that was, you know what? Young people are ahead of us. They're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. And there are positives to that. But there are sometimes negatives to that too. And I guess our role as youth workers and people who want to help young people is to, first of all, understand what their lived reality is, what it is their world, and then move on from that. And then maybe ask them to help us understand their world and act as facilitators. Really enjoyed that parallel session. I realise I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. Okay, day 2, we were a lovely example of public health in Vestfold in Norway, and public health policy, which actually was based on participative action research. How amazing is it that social policy in Norway seeks to create a health service that responds to people's needs? It was about this time that I thought, I wonder how I can emigrate to Norway, because it kind of felt like a nirvana place to be. And the examples that were given really gave rise to some fruitful discussions within the breakout groups. And, some people were a little bit frustrated because their public health policy doesn't necessarily represent their needs, and it doesn't repeat Norway's example. But it was really inspirational nonetheless. We then moved on to ARV's outreach work with street kids yesterday. And there are lots of things that came up for that for people. And there are some standout phrases, that from being controlled to being in control. And the just sit and do nothing. They're really great phrases that stuck with the groups and with me. And I was thinking last night, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I thought, power. Youth workers and those people who work with young people really have to be responsive to power. And if you're doing outreach work on the streets with young people, you're suddenly on their turf. You don't have the power. They have the power. They can go, fuck off, excuse my language, or they can walk away. So you have to be really good at being able to engage with young people at that level. And I thought it was a great example of a small-scale piece of work being studied, reflected on, and shared. I am really running through this, and I'm going to write a little bit of a report afterwards and send it through, so you should be able to see the report afterwards. Going on to this morning's session with Paul, and the one phrase that's really resonated from Paul's session in terms of risk has been the Swiss Army knife. Youth workers are the Swiss Army knife, and at some point we have to find what the right tool is to take out at the right time. And, I think really what Paul enabled us to do was he talked about his trauma from his personal and professional experience, and that allowed us in group work to talk about our own painful experiences too. It was quite a liberatory moment. So what have we learnt? Well, I think what we've learned is you cannot pour from an empty vessel. Self-care is really important. In order to help other people, you have to help yourself, and you can't do that unless you have quality recovery time, and a strategy for working with people. The other thing I've learned is this seminar just would not have been as successful as it is without all of you and all of your involvement and your ability to share. Because what we've done is we've resonated with each other and we've made something magical. And that's how I'd like to leave it.